Welcome back to the podcast. Gabe, Giannis, and I, we're on the mic this week. No guests this week, Gabe. I mean, I feel like we've had a guest like all the time lately. But before that, it was just like you and me. Now it's like, then we went guest. And then here we are. We're back on the show.
And some awesome guests, man. Like if people haven't had a chance to go back or you're new listening, like I'm looking, it's with Sal Frizella, Matt Chan, Miranda, MDV, which is like, you know, he was a guest on the podcast, but MDV's been, you know, a part of the podcast that we do. He's got the intro. So that one felt like kind of you and me, and it was a great episode. Then Ryan Mickler, Savan. So quite a lineup that we've had. And that's probably covering the past, 3-4 weeks. But yeah, no, it's fun to be back on the mic with just you, but the guests we've had have been incredible, man. I've really enjoyed the conversations. And I think what's interesting too, is they've been such different people, different topics, even though like everything kind of tends to come back to like parenting. But like, for example, you have like Savan over here.
Oh my God.
You have like, well, honestly, you have Savan and anyone else, and they're pretty different. But no, man, I've enjoyed having the guests on, and I hope listeners have as well. But if you haven't caught any of those episodes, definitely go back and check them out.
Yeah, I mean, Savan's definitely on he does it his way, and everybody else is kind of doing it, you know, again, their own way. You know, Thomas DeLauer, who we had on, so we went to LA, got to train with him, got to podcast with him in person, and then I happen to be, he actually has a place up here in Northern California, a place called Carmel. I happen to be there as well, and dude, we hit a legit flex session, and I had not done incline bench press combined with Arnold press, dude, solid combo. And then we did the basically hammer. This is one you programmed, right? But going from the incline bench, and the rep scheme you had was 8 to 10. Oh man. So anyways, I got that. I've been hitting a little bit more flex workouts lately, so I feel like I'm getting a little bit more jacked. You know, summertime's coming right around the corner. But thanks for putting out that great program.
Yeah, man. So this will come out April 15th. So for anyone that is on the app following Flex, you know, you're 2 weeks into this new cycle. Dude, I've had so much fun like writing that program and training with it myself. And it's funny because I know we talked about a couple episodes ago, like the open and like not losing conditioning and stuff, but like just the value of like feeling good more than anything, like just not feeling banged up, man. Like, especially now, like Shay's getting a little bit older, you know, like I'm carrying him, like I'm messing around with him. We're playing, we're running, we're doing stuff outside. Like I remember, man, when I was like, and again, this isn't like to say that if you do CrossFit, you will be banged up. That's not what I'm saying at all. Cause I don't think that I was doing CrossFit, definitely not how they say you're supposed to program it at the level 1. You know, it's just once you get caught up in this, like the sport of it, and you're doing a bunch of volume, you're doing a bunch of stuff, it bangs you up, man. I remember my knees used to hurt, my low back used to hurt, my hip used to bug me. Like I felt like I always had something going on to where I had to warm up. And then it was like, okay, this is bearable. Then you get through your workout and then you cool down again and you're like just in pain. And like to not be in pain is like, I'll never go back. As soon as I do something, like I'll still do, if I do something on the back rack and I go heavy and don't really like brace my core enough, I'll feel a little bit of like the nerve pain I had when I herniated my L4, L5 and L5S1. Then I just won't do it. And it'll go away in a couple of days, but I do get that constant reminder of like, there's just some stuff that I can't do anymore. And that's fine.
Yeah, man. But with Thomas, it was funny. So we follow the full flex. And at the end, we hit a 10-minute EMOM, of course, of assault bike and DB step ups. Cause he's actually, so he's going to Normandy. And so it's
he's doing a big ruck, right?
Yeah. I'm going to butcher this. I want to say it's the 80th anniversary of Normandy.
You're definitely butchering this.
I totally butchered it, but essentially they're going out for this anniversary of Normandy, and he's rucking. He's gonna be rucking a marathon. Some of these other guys are rucking, I want to say like 60, 70 miles. And so he's been preparing for that heavily. And one of the takeaways from the episode that we did with him that I thought was interesting is a heart rate monitor. And for a lot of years, like I haven't been a very big fan of a heart rate monitor. I think they're kind of whatever. I remember at the level 1s, we used to always say like, there was indicators of if you're getting more fit, and we were looking for area underneath the curve. And we were talking about work capacity across broad time in different domains. And we would say, hey, is heart rate an indicator of your fitness? And it's an indicator, but it's not the only thing, because the example I would always use, like if you get pulled over by a cop, your heart rate will spike, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily getting any fitter. So it's a factor, but it's not the only factor. But when we were talking to Thomas DeLauer, I found it to be really interesting that he uses a heart rate monitor to hold him accountable to stay in lower zones. And that's something I'm thinking about taking into my training, which is if I went out and I said, all right, I'm going to go for a ruck, I'm going to be in like this zone 2, like low key, like just try and get my heart rate at, I don't know, 100 beats a minute, let's just say. And all of a sudden I'm out there and I get all fired up and I start jogging because that's just the way I am. Then I'm no longer in that zone. But if I hold myself accountable to stay in that zone on the heart rate monitor, that's the key. So that was one big takeaway from the podcast that was helpful, is that I could use the heart rate monitor as a way to actually do less and not try and just throttle it, because that's what I'm naturally going to gravitate towards.
Guy throttles all the time. And that reminds me, I feel like we're doing a recap of all the past episodes we've been doing, which I enjoy. But that reminds me, if you remember when we closed out the episode with Matt Chan, he also alluded to the fact when you asked him, like, what's something you've changed your mind about in the past few years, he was saying how, you know, his big thing, and we have to have him back on to expand on this, but that CrossFit.
Ooh, yeah, he like hit it right at the end.
Program.
Remember that?
Yeah, CrossFit's an incomplete program. And the reason he was alluding to is, like, you know, when you're training in CrossFit, you're literally training like this, like 12 to 20 minute time domain at like anaerobic, high intensity effort. And in a lot of ways, like that's exclusively how you train. And that served you obviously very well in the sport. And it still serves you very well now. But I think that one thing that people should at least be open to is the fact that there's huge benefits to going long and slow. And the thing is, like, I know that there are athletes now, especially at the games level, that are doing the slow and long stuff. But it's just not something that gets talked about as much. It's not something that's in any way realistic to do in like a class environment. Like if you're an athlete that's going to a CrossFit gym, you know, you're not going to come into class to do like a 45 to 60 minute, like true zone 2 workout. That for the most part is stuff you have to do on your own. So it's interesting because going back to, you know, CrossFit and Greg's like original teachings, I can't remember the quote. Maybe you can remind me of, but it's What is it? It's like the areas that you don't train are your deficiencies. It's somewhere in the journal. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you butchered that, but
Oh, I know I butchered it, but the whole thinking is like the things you aren't doing are obviously the things that are going to be your weakness. And I think that by definition, there are things that are missing from, you know, CrossFit programming, especially when it needs to be done in the constraints of like a gym and class. And is that to say that you can't join a gym and get super fit and hit 80, 90% of your bases? No, but I think that there is this other 10% that's important.
Yeah, I mean, I was just pulling up. So heart rate zone 1, 55 to 65% of heart rate max. Zone 2, aerobic base, 65 to 75% heart rate max. And then boom, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5. So, but I mean, if you think about it, you know, one of the reasons why I think Chan changed his mind there as an incomplete program, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I believe what happened was maybe like 5 years ago, he competed in this like 3-day event where it was like nonstop. And you didn't sleep, you like interval, like it was like very long distance. And I think he had a difficult time with it. And we should get him back on the podcast to ask more about this. But I think that opened his mind that doing 15 and 20 minute workouts, I think are very conducive to overall fitness for any guy, girl who wants to be able to train, protect, provide. I think it's perfect. However, if you have a desire to do 24-hour events, 12-hour events, you have to go out long. And I think that's really what he was alluding to as CrossFit as an overall program. It's so focused on like this right there in that niche, which I think gives you the best bang for your buck, but it's not going to help you if you're looking to do 20-hour, you know, if you're looking to do a 20-hour event, man, you got to add in some more time.
For sure. It always comes down to, and we've talked about this a lot, like identifying kind of what your specific goals are and, doing something that's conducive to that. And I think that the coolest part about that is that you can still maintain other areas, generally speaking, while you work on these specific areas. Like if you want to work on aesthetics, putting on muscle, so on and so forth, you can work on that and still just kind of like dip your toe into like the aerobic conditioning every now and then, and you're not going to completely lose it. I think that that's something that people I think need to shy away from as much as that, like, man, like I really want to put on muscle, but if I stop doing, these types of workouts 4 or 5 times a week, like it's going to disappear. I know I used to think that too. And it's so not the case, like so not the case.
Yeah. I mean, especially, yeah. One of the things that it brings up a good point, something I've been thinking about lately, is this idea of being intentional. And so,
Mm.
I think being intentional in your training makes sense. And I think it's really easy analogy, right? Like, hey, you need to be intentional. You need to show up into the garage, and you show up into the gym, and you get the work done. But also just like being intentional in the way that you approach life, I think is something I've been thinking about a lot, especially when it comes to having kids. I had a question the other day about parenting from someone, and dude, being a parent is tough. And I think the one thing that I could lean on as like looking back on later on and being like, hey, there's no second chances, no redos, no do-overs. Like, and to Savon's piece, and people, when they listen to the Savon podcast, he could be, is the word abrasive? Is that the right term? Is that like, not like he could be strong in
Unapologetic.
his unapologetic.
Yeah.
And
'Cause a lot of the things that he says and I think believes are things that, especially now, you would have to kind of like, well, like kind of like dance around it. He just says it because he believes it. And yeah, unapologetic, I think.
unapologetic. And him and I have a little bit different views on stuff, which is what we should have on this show, right? Is people with different views and be able to talk it through. And I think that's key. But one of the things that him and I do align on very much so is intentionality with the kids. And I think that if you're intentionally trying to show up, if you're intentionally trying to get them into programs, if you're intentionally trying to, reflect and say, hey, how am I doing today, tomorrow, this week, this month? Dude, I mean, you're not going to need a second chance, because to his point, he's trying to create, he said it really well. And I like this idea. He's been training his entire life to build the Sistine Chapel. Like Leonardo da Vinci, right? Like he has been preparing his entire life for this particular pursuit, which is his greatest work, which is putting his, lessons learned into these 3 young boys and creating this beautiful Sistine Chapel. And I really got a lot out of that, like terminology that like I've spent my life's work now trying to get to a point where I could be intentional to say, hey, what can I impart on the kids and how do I get them to the best possible place they could be? And I thought that was really helpful, though, the way he described it. Did you hear the way you picked up on that too, right?
For sure. Yeah, man. He dropped a lot of really good knowledge and also a lot of it, slightly controversial statements. That was a fun episode. But yeah, man, I really appreciated how he framed everything and how, it always goes back to just being super intentional with everything he does, right? Like the rules he was talking about, not bending to those rules, so on and so forth. I love the fact that like he talked about if you decide to raise your kids, alluding to the fact that if you're not homeschooling, you're not raising your own kids.
Oh gosh. Yeah. Oh, your audio just cut out. There it is. Now
is abrasive and might definitely ruffle some feathers. But one thing that I think is important that I took away from that episode, and I talked to you about this a little bit once we started recording, is that I hope that everyone out there is 300% convicted with the decisions they're making with their kids, whether that's having a home birth or doing it in the hospital, whether that's sending them to private Catholic school or a public school or homeschooling. Like, I genuinely hope that everyone feels like they did the research, they talked to their partner, to their spouse, and they made the decision that they 100% believe is best for their kids. Like, at the end of the day, like what I choose to do is what I choose to do because of like the values that we have as a family, what we believe is important, and what works for us. But like, that is by no means what you should do, what anyone listening should do. Like, but I hope that everyone feels super confident about what they're doing because they did the work to like, what are the options out there? What are the pros and cons of homeschooling? Can I make it work? Is it something that's realistic? Do I want to do that? Or do I want to, have that time to build a career and have 2 incomes as like, those are all very, very valid points that given the different values other families might have, like homeschooling you shouldn't do it because other people are doing it. You should do it because you feel 100% convicted that it's the best thing for you and your family. And that was my biggest takeaway is I think that, he obviously came off that he had very strong opinions about, homeschooling and home birth and all these things, it was exciting for me because it was in line with a lot of the things that I believe. But again, like I hope I can't make this clear enough. Like that doesn't mean that I think that it's the right thing for anyone else out there. I just think that everyone should do the work to make the right decision for them and then feel good about the decision they make. What I hope is that people aren't out there like, man, I think homeschooling would make a lot of sense, but they don't do it because, maybe pressure from family or maybe like, the fear of judgment from their friends and peers. Like that to me is unfortunate. But if you feel good about the decision you're making, awesome.
Yeah. No, I think you described that really well when we were talking about this after we recorded with him, because I was like, wow. He came with some heat and, dude, I think you're totally right. Like cause I was saying like, look, dude, we're like the antithesis of what he was talking about. Like we had a great experience, the best experience we could have, having a birth in a hospital. And then we don't homeschool our kids. And like, we're the complete opposite of what he was talking about. And I think that that's okay as long as both partners have a conversation and decide that it's what's best for them and their family. And I think that goes for everything, dude. Like, honestly, man, it goes for everything. And, but I think even just having that conversation and being aware of like these different choices, what do we want to do? And then go out and do it. It's all good.
That's it. And I hope that people get that from the episode. Because again, we share what's important to us and I hope to share as much as possible as I kind of like go through my own journey of being a dad and trying to figure this thing out. Like I'm like you trying to make the best decisions I can with the information I have at the time that I make them. And I know I'm going to fuck shit up. Like, of course I'm going to make mistakes. Like it would be silly and very naive to think that like, well, I'm on this podcast and I read all these books and I listen to all these podcasts, so I'm not going to mess anything up. I'm sure I'm going to mess some shit up royally, but I'm like doing my very best. And I hope that me sharing the decisions I make and the things that I see work do nothing but just like provide ideas for people of like, well, maybe I hadn't considered that. And maybe we should have a discussion about, is this something that would work for our family, that would work for me as a dad? And if it does work, great. I'm so happy that me talking about it helped. And if it doesn't, also great. Like we're very different people with different values and different families. And like, not everyone should be doing the same things that I'm doing, period.
Yeah, man. I mean, so it brings me to this idea you actually wrote down: strong beliefs loosely held. I think is an interesting terminology. So where did was that Chris Williams?
Thomas, no. Thomas DeLauer said it. So Thomas DeLauer said it on the Chris Williams podcast that he was on, because his like big thing with nutrition, which is like his thing, is that like he'll believe very strongly in something, but like he's very like, show me the research that says that like, oh, this isn't right, and like I will happily like walk back my position. And he's done that with many different things, and I think that like I can appreciate that. And to me, it's been a big takeaway of how I want to go about everything I do, because I should believe strongly about these decisions I'm making, but they should be loosely held. And that like, if there's compelling reasons to just admit that like, hey, I got that one wrong and I should course correct, that's really important. If I just start sticking to my guns because I don't want to be wrong, or I feel like I made a big decision and now I have to stick to it, I think that that's where I'll get in trouble in any big decisions that I'm making.
Yeah, I think we're this kind of, I think when it comes to like what we're referring to, your beliefs on nutrition, your beliefs on fitness, you have strong beliefs that are loosely held, meaning like if there was a better, and one of the things that Greg Glassman, I do think contributed to society in a big way was like, and right or wrong, it would be like, hey, like show us a more effective fitness program and like we will adopt it. And whether they did or didn't do that, it doesn't matter. But the fact was like that was the theory. The theory was always like, hey, show us a more effective way to get fitter and like we'll check it out. And over time, obviously CrossFit has evolved, right? You're seeing a little bit different training today than you did before, especially for the CrossFit Games. But nonetheless, I think where this obviously isn't specific is like, I don't know, for example, in your relationship, I have strong beliefs that are not loosely held. Like those strong beliefs in my relationship with my wife, those are like very strong and they're held. Or for many people, probably in their faith, right? They want to have strong beliefs and hold that. But I think in regards to like, what we're trying to say here is that if there is data or information or some type of change in what you've gathered, like you need to be open-minded enough to not dig your heels in just because your ego is getting whatever and be open-minded to change.
Yeah, I think that like, let me give you a perfect example though of like relationship stuff that like was a pretty strong belief for me that like had to be loosely held. And I've been checking myself as of late. Ryan Mickler. So the Ryan Mickler episode,
Yeah.
he brought up this idea of like, and it was really interesting because, he's gone through a divorce and the whole reason we started talking about it was because people had criticized him that like he didn't have the authority to talk about relationships because, obviously his didn't end how people want. Ideally, they're like, you get married till death do us part. He got a divorce and it wasn't a great experience, but I learned something from that episode in that I definitely tend to, when Ariel comes with something, like I immediately want to give her the solution. Like I feel like my role in those conversations, and I'm not as brash as the examples Ryan was giving, but I immediately want to be like, well, it's because you're not doing this, or it's because you should do this a little differently. I've as soon as he was saying that, I had a moment of like, shit, like I do that all the time. And it's never been, I don't think, like a reason that, we've gotten into like an argument or something. But I think that him pointing out the fact that many of those times it might be more useful for me to literally just listen and just like make her feel validated in the fact that she's feeling a certain way about whatever before I immediately like tell her, well, the reason you feel that way is because you didn't have that conversation, or because you didn't do this thing that you said you were going to do, or because you're not doing this. Like I tend to do that first. And again, it comes from a good place, right? Like it comes from a place where like, I want her to call me out on my bullshit and help me level up. So I feel like my role reciprocally is to call her out on her bullshit and help her level up. Cause we both have bullshit. I'm not saying that like, I'm always the one saying, like, she keeps me in check about many, many things. And I appreciate that about her. But I think that just because of, and Thomas DeLauer talked about this too. Like
he talked about with his daughter,
just the difference between like men and women. Like, I think that it would be better served for our relationship for me to just listen more than immediately try and like provide a solution every time. So the reason I started this whole thing is that was something that in my relationship for a long time was a very strong belief of mine. I'm here to help. I'm here to help my partner level up. Like we're a partnership. We got to, keep ourselves in check and like constantly tell each other how we can be better. But it was very loosely held in that like Ryan made a really good point. And I think he has a lot more wisdom and experience being married for 18 years, even though it ended up in divorce, that he was willing to share on the podcast that like, I am now so much more like conscious of that, and have, since we recorded that episode, tried to be better about just like, I'm just here to listen. I'm just here to say like, man, that really does suck. Like exactly what he was saying. So just a big example of how I do think that the strong beliefs loosely held thing can apply to even things that you believe strongly with your relationship. Faith, not so much. I think that obviously that's a completely different thing. But I think that even when it comes to those things that are very important, like you could hear something from someone else that has more years, more wisdom than you, and you should be open-minded to like, hey, that might be something I could do better.
Yeah. So the strong beliefs loosely held, and just to back up what you're saying, Thomas DeLauer originally put this in my ear. This is one of the reasons why I love the podcast. He originally put it in his ear because he saw certain characteristics of his daughter when she would talk. She just needed him to listen. She didn't, like, that's it. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh shoot, that's what's happening with my wife too. And then all of a sudden, separately to this conversation, Ryan Mickler said the exact same thing in a different way, right? About a different situation. But I was like, oh. So the other day we're leaving this residency program that Ava's in, and Ashley's saying something. And dude, I was like, right in that moment, I'm like, bro, I was like, I'm trying to provide a solution. I want to try and help. I want to whatever. And then I was just like, Jason, just shut the hell up. Just listen. Just listen. Just shake your head. Just be like, all right. Because they don't want you to solve all the problems. They just want you to be there to listen in that particular case. And yeah, that was a big takeaway for me as well. So if you guys, I know this is like a recap episode, but that was that was an example of, I didn't necessarily have like a strong belief in like trying to help. I didn't know I had a strong belief in that, but by them talking about it opened my eyes. And as the situation was unfolding in front of me, I saw myself doing exactly what he said created issues in his relationships. So I'm like, oh, let me go ahead and put the pedals on right now and just listen. So yeah, man, I'm glad you brought that up. That's a really good example.
And the other thing that I've been thinking about a lot is, and this goes way back, man, way back to the podcast that me and Ariel started. This has got to be, man, this is like pre-NCFIT, or I think just when I started with NCFIT. Me and Ariel had this podcast, the West Coast Advantage. It was fun. We had like a couple guests on. And one of the conversations we had was with a Detach, who I know that you know.
Yeah.
And she said this thing that has stuck to me, like, you know, now it's been like coming up on like 6 years. And she was saying that her and her husband,
Mike,
you know,
right?
Mike would go to couples therapy and were working on their relationship actively when things were going good, because it like allows you to have the conversations with a lot less like defenses up. Because if you only go when things start going bad, then obviously everyone's going to be guarded. And it's not that it's too late. It's just that if you're going and trying to improve your relationship when things are good and trying to make them even better, like you're going in there in such a more positive headspace to listen to maybe your spouse say what you could do better, as opposed to like if there's already some resentment and some friction built up, then you go in there a lot more guarded. And I think it could be a lot less productive. And I'm not saying that everyone should go out there and do couples therapy. We don't, but we try and have these conversations where, what can I do better? What can you do better? Even though like, I would say we have a great relationship right now, but great can always be better. And I think that to me is something that I try and go into these conversations with these men and these husbands into, is that even though I couldn't be happier with how we're doing as new parents and how we're doing with our relationship, I know that could be better. And I think that me being open-minded about that and trying to make good great is how we create a hedge, so that we're never at the point where like, man, like shit's been bad for a few months and we really need to work on it. And that all came from that conversation I had way back then about like, you know, like you can work on the things that are going really well. Like I know you and Ashley are a fucking amazing team and you guys have dealt with a lot and it's brought you super close. But I mean, I think I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you would agree, like we can always get better as husbands. And I think continuing to do that work, even well before Ashley or Ariel come up to us and are like, hey man, like what's been going on the past month, is how we never get to that point.
Yeah. And well, and then also when life throws you a curveball, you're better prepared for it. You know, that was the whole reason why I wrote a book. I wrote a book because I just felt like, you know, we had imparted this mindset that really allowed for strong relationships. And at the heart of it, like I talked about this idea of AMRAP mentality in regards to having your fitness, having money in business, but really at the heart of it was relationships. Like when shit hits the fan and when you're in a really difficult situation, the relationships become your number one principle. Like money's important, your fitness is important for sure. But having other people around and having these relationships, I think is really important. So if you could prioritize those conversations now before shit hits the fan, it's only going to help out. And, you know, life can change real quick, you know? And so you want to make sure you're having those kind of conversations and having real conversations and having real relationships. That's one of the reasons why, you know, I think the men's club have been a step in that direction for a lot of guys. We're on week, like, I don't even know, man. Like, I think we're on week, like a lot. Like I think we're
on week a lot.
We're on week a lot. I think we're on like, we're 30 weeks in and, yeah. Anyways.
All right, taking a break from the podcast to talk to you about the Train Hard app. If you're listening to this episode, it means you care about training, protecting, and providing, which means that you care about your health, your fitness, and becoming the most capable human being you can, just like me and Jason. Me and Jason use the Train Hard app for our training because there are 3 programs and it has something regardless of the season in your life you're in. If you have the time and energy and you're trying to be the fittest, strongest human being you can, we have 4: strength and conditioning 5 days a week. If life is super busy right now and you need something that's just keeping your momentum from getting to 0, 20, 30 minutes max in the gym, in and out. It has a dumbbell version. If you don't have access to a bunch of equipment, we have the EMOM program. And if you're just trying to be the most jacked dad in the room, work on your body composition, we have the Flex program, which is exactly how I train and the program that I write. So if you haven't already, check the link in the podcast show notes, download the Train Hard app, train hard, but let's get back to the show. It's funny that you mentioned that. Another thing that I've been has been on my mind a lot lately, especially since we joined this gym and we have this community now, is it's so hard to make really close friends as an adult.
Yeah, it's
so
really hard.
Dude,
Once your kids get older, it'll be easier though. Cause Shay's once your kids get 4 or 5 years old, it's easier because they start getting in it, whether you homeschool, go to regular school, go whatever.
Yeah, but there'll be sports and circles.
Yeah. Exactly. But it's hard. I would imagine probably the toughest time for young families is probably when they're born till they're 4 or 5,
Yeah. And we're super close to our families, both geographically and close, which is I can't imagine not having that. We're super fortunate. Ariel's parents live a stone's throw from our house, and then my parents live 15 minutes away. But beyond that, beyond just me and Ariel and our core family, and then just our immediate parents, for a long time before we joined the gym, that was it. Everything else was I'm obviously close with the people I work with. I'm close with you, but it was all interactions through a screen, and something that never was that level of oh, that's a really, really close friend that is going to come over for dinner on a regular basis, or I'm going to see on a regular basis. Okay. It never was that. And I think we're closer to that now that we're in this community. But to your point, the hard thing too is a lot of my really, really close friends that I would still consider really close friends. Most of them don't have kids. And so that's been super tough because it's just being a dad is everything that I am right now. That's why I enjoy these conversations so much. It's what I'm talking about. It's what I'm reading. It's what I'm focused. It's funny too. Dude, baseball season just started, and I love baseball. I love base, and I haven't watched a full game. I'm just I don't. It's not even that the interest isn't there. Is that I have other shit. I honestly rather play with blocks with my toddler at night, and we try not to have the TV on while we're doing stuff, than watch the game, which would have been something so important to me in the past. And it's what my other friends are talking about and what's going on. And I just I have this thing going on over here. So it's tough. Not to blame anyone, but it's tough.
I just want to make a quick announcement. So Kate and I were on a fantasy baseball. I know nothing about fantasy baseball. I won my first week. Thank you very much.
I know you have Pete Alonso on your team. He hit a home run, so I'm sure that helped.
But hey, it's interesting because Ashley and I, we had kids pretty young. I think we were 24, 25, I think, when we had Ava.
Yeah.
Pretty young, right? We got married, I think 22, 23. So when we had our first child, dude, we didn't, and this is probably going to relate to someone who's listening, so I want to share it. When we had Ava, it was tough because at the time, the rest of our friends were still a little bit more in that party mode. They were kind of doing their own thing. And we were the first ones. And I did feel a little bit like I was on an island because I didn't have many people to connect to on that level, because I also didn't know, the first baby I really held was my own. I didn't have other friends that had kids where I could do that. Baby came out, I'm like, oh shit. Okay, well then let's go. But for a little bit, you have this almost I don't want to say it's a lost sense of identity because you're so connected to parenting. But then all of a sudden, when your friends that were part of a previous circle are on a different path, it's almost the same as if you choose to improve your overall health and wellness. But before, you would always hang out with this crew that went out and drank, whatever. Then all of a sudden you're like, dude, I got to kind of like be on this path. And it's hard because, you feel like you're detaching from these people that you're really connected to. Similar idea, not exactly the same when you have kids, is that like you can no longer go with your friends out to the bars at night or whatever, because you have to prioritize your sleep because you're with your kids. But over time that changes. And I'd say like the first couple of years is tough, especially if you're a younger parent with around other parents that don't have kids, because then you go to the park and like the kids are like running around. You can't really connect with them because you have to like keep up with the kids. But once the kids get old enough, man, where they could do sports, where they could be in, different classes and you could connect with the parents while the kids are doing something else, I'm telling you, man, it gets way easier. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there to the universe. You are going to find a new tribe as the kids get older. And it's not that your friends from college are not going to, it's not that they're going to go away. They just might be on a different path, but then you're going to find parents that are on the same path and you're going to connect on an additional level like we have. It's going to happen for everybody listening, I hope.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I know that. And I definitely don't want this to come off as like a woe is me, I have no friends.
Yeah, of course. No.
But it's one of those things
evolve.
For sure. And it's also one of those things, because you mentioned it with AMRAP mentality and like the importance of relationships. And I think a part of it is this pressure that like, at least I know how important having relationships are. And I know how important having relationships are beyond just like me and Ariel and beyond like me and my parents. And I feel like if I were to take a step back and objectively be like, what are the areas when I'm trying to like optimize all these things that like is maybe a little lacking, like that just tends to stand out. And then I kind of struggle between this thing because like, I don't feel this like need to go out there and like make a bunch of friends. Like I feel so satisfied and fulfilled with like my family and who I have and my work and stuff. So it's kind of like finding this balance of like, well, they say you need to eat vegetables, but I don't feel like I really want to eat vegetables. It's kind of the same thing. Like I know that these relationships are super important, but they take a lot of work. And I'm not necessarily like drawn to like, man, I got to go out there and like make these like 3 like really good friends here locally in the area. But anyway,
yeah, you don't want to put that pressure on yourself either, man.
I'm telling you, right?
It'll evolve. Like there was a time, like I said, where like a lot of our high school, college friends, like they didn't have kids, and then when they did, they were younger than my kids, and dude, like a couple of years with the kid, it makes a big difference. Like you can't have a 5-year-old playing with a 2-year-old. It's just, maybe that's not the best example. An 8-year-old with a 2-year-old is just kind of weird. They don't have the same connection, and so. But you will find it'll just happen organically, dude. And I think even just like you're saying, like you're just being intentional. Like, hey, what are areas? I think a lot of that comes from this podcast, man. You talk to people, you hear, you listen. But then at some point, I think we should all like reflect and say, hey, you could get value from listening to all these episodes. But if you then write down notes and try and implement everything and like stress out yourself so much to have the perfect X, Y, Z, that's not what we're trying to say, man. Like that's not the goal. Because if you're trying to if you're stressing out because you're listening to these podcasts, you feel like you have to be a perfect example of whatever. That's not what Gabe and I are trying to accomplish with this podcast. We're just trying to shine light on little areas and just pick 1 or 2 to start focusing on, but don't get overwhelmed, man. Like we want people to be happy overall. That's the goal.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of those things where like, also, if you work on one thing, and this is funny because it applies to like fitness, it applies to nutrition, it applies like there's so many parallels in all these things. But I feel like if you focus on just one little thing, like it tends to snowball on its own. Whereas if you try and focus on 10 things, it tends to like none of them get better. And it just ends up being like super frustrating. And then you end up like not even back at square one, but like at square like -2. Because you've like wasted this time, you've like frustrated yourself, you've seen no results. And now you're like, well, this isn't for me. So I always think that, man, like just finding one thing, like what's one small win, what's one small area that I could be better at and like working on that. And then gradually you'll find the next thing and just kind of move from there.
Dude, I gotta tell you, we put up we shared a post. I shared a post on Instagram. Then we actually did as a Q&A episode about the 3 sports to get kids into. And one of the things that this last week, it just really hit home for me was the benefits of baseball and golf. So I didn't grow up with baseball. I didn't grow up with golf. I didn't know anything about them. I don't really Even now, I got a fantasy team, but I don't know any of the players. I know none. I had no idea that guy hit a home run until it gave me 10 points on my fantasy draft. But dude, one of the things I love about getting young boys in particular into those two sports is how they have to refocus every single hit, every single throw, every single whatever at bat. So this last weekend was just really eye-opening for me because Caden had a baseball game and he had a golf match. Like he's now on a competitive golf team. And what was interesting about it is that you could have one bad pitch and then you have to recenter, or you could have one bad hit and then you have to recenter, or maybe you don't recenter and you just keep going off the rails. But I would recommend exposing young boy. And I wouldn't have said this a couple of years ago. Like I didn't know much about it, but now that I'm seeing it firsthand, it's been really impactful because if they are competitive and if they want to do well, they have to learn to like slow down, to take each throw, each hit as its own hit and not allow one bad hole, one bad inning to dictate the rest of the game. And I feel like baseball and golf probably do that more than almost any other sport I could think of. So I just want to give a shout out to those two. If you're thinking about what sports to expose the kids to, those were two I hadn't thought about that I think have been really impactful for us.
Yeah, you have to like, it teaches two really important skills that we talk about all the time, or maybe it's just one, just this idea of detachment, right? Like this idea of like detaching from the emotion or the reaction of the result that just happened because you need to move on to this next one. And yeah, man, like the best players in the league are just because baseball is such a game of like, you're never going to be a pitcher that never allows a run, and you're never going to be a hitter that like gets a hit every time you go up. Like baseball, the beauty of baseball is it's such a game of failure. Like the best of the best of the best have, if you're a pitcher, you have starts where you get absolutely rocked. The best hitters, like, you know, you get an out 7 out of 10 times and you're a Hall of Fame batter. So it forces you, because there's so much just failure, that like the best are the ones that can fail time and time again and then still come back with the same focus, the same, you know, concentration, and try and get either the hit or the strikeout or whatever the next time. It's a beautiful game, dude. You don't have to convince me.
Don't get me wrong, dude. I'm all about like that smash mouth football, dude. Don't get me wrong. I'm all about that. I think that's going to be exciting too. And aggressive jiu-jitsu and aggressive work, all of that, all of those things. I'm a huge advocate for. But the ability to do what you just said, I think is something that you can't really get like in a grappling match. You can't really get in, you know, a football game necessarily. Like you on the mound, you know, up to a ball, trying to hit it and having to like realize like your last hit, detaching from that. Like that doesn't define your next hit or your next play. And I think that there's a lot of benefit that could carry over into real life. So I'd encourage any parent to look into that, because it wasn't something that was on our radar when our kids were young. And now through exposure in a different ways, you know, it's been impactful. It reminds me a lot of when I used to race BMX bikes. You would be on this gate with 7 other guys. And when the gate dropped, like it was game on, and it was nerve-wracking when you're up there, but you would have like heats. And the way you did on the first heat, as long as you qualify for the next heat, like you're at a 0-sum game. Like you could have taken fourth, you took it first. You had to like detach from your previous heat and like do it again and again and again. Similar, but different than golf or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I wish I had played even just team sports in general. Swimming taught me a lot, man. Cause swimming is like the only thing I did growing up. I think that, you know, like the fact that like practices were so early, the fact that like being a good swimmer requires you just to spend so much time and it's so repetitive, and like the input has to be like so vast for, you know, one race that you're going to swim. I think that had a lot of value. But to your point, the one thing that you kind of never get in swimming is this idea where like, you know, you kind of have to like maybe reset and go and do again in his focus. It's just a grind. Like, yeah. It's just like
many times
and you perform, and many times, and like, even like the races, like you can mess up here and there, but it's just about like, you know, have you done the work beforehand to actually perform? Like there's less, I think, at stake when you go and like do the actual race, especially the stuff that I did, because I wasn't a sprinter. I could see this being more for like the people that ran like the super short distances where you have to be super focused and stuff. But for me, like, because I did distance stuff, it was just like, did you put the work in to be fit enough to like not die out on the 20th lap of this race? That's
well, and
it.
then you got momentum. So like my brother-in-law and I were watching what's fuck, someone's gonna give me shit for this. Basketball.
March Madness.
March Madness. Yeah. and so we were watching March Madness, and I think currently when we're recording this, it was like I don't know, like it's almost like to the Final Four, almost. And we were watching it, and I was just telling him, because my brother-in-law played college basketball, how momentum is such a major factor in sports, in particular basketball. And he's like, dude, he's like, look at it in football. Team's down by 14, team gets an interception and returns it for a touchdown. All of a sudden, momentum shifts, boom. Basketball, same thing. They go on a 20-point run, the game's over. He's like, it was just really interesting that we were having this discussion about momentum and the impact that it had on sports. And we both came to the conclusion that like momentum is critical, but momentum is a byproduct also of preparation. Like if you're prepared, if you've been putting in the work, if your team is ready, that helps you ultimately to get to the point where you can kick in this momentum. But momentum was a real thing. It was just a cool conversation him and I were having, in particular about basketball, because like a lot of those games, man, are just decided by like 2 points. And it could be just a quick momentum shift back and forth throughout the game.
But the interesting thing there is that like the thing that can counteract momentum is what we were just talking about, is this idea of detachment. I think that the reason momentum is such right. The reason momentum is so powerful in both football and basketball is because the opposing team gets kind of put on their heels because they're like, oh shit. And you start doing things differently. You start to freak out. You start to doubt yourself, all these things that if you have a really strong team, that the culture is that like, hey, we let that interception happen, but that doesn't define us on the next, like time we're out. It's the same thing we were doing before that got us the 2 touchdown lead. Then you're not as much a victim to that. And again, all this is easier said than done, but it's interesting how both of those, I think, interplay in that the reason momentum is so big in sports is because of the impact it has on the opposing team. And the way you counteract that as the opposing team is detaching from that last result that, quote unquote, changed the momentum, and just keep doing what you were doing to be in the lead in the first place. And you'll probably continue doing what you're doing. But again, that could be really tough, right?
Well, so when we talk about detachment, this is an echelon front thing, and the goal of detachment is to detach from your ego, your emotion, and your perspective. So those three. So your ego would be like, this is more so like from a business perspective. They also utilize this in terms of like military, perhaps. But when we talk about the art of detachment, it's, hey, is my ego getting in the way? Am I becoming emotional? I should detach from that. And then the perspective is unique, right? Because you want to say, hey, am I detaching from my own perspective? Am I looking through different lenses? But when it comes to like this momentum, it's interesting. I didn't even know I was going to talk about this, but like the momentum shift you see in sports, you sometimes even see that in real life on like a more of a macro scale or even a micro scale. But if you're able to detach either way, I think that's a really great way not to let something that was bad get terrible, or something that's, good even go away, because you're just trying to like detach, say, okay, things are good, have appreciation, and then re-enter that space. And so that's something I could think about a lot more, is like how to look at momentum, not just from sport, but how it relates to life. And then are you detaching from different things that might be pulling you away from that, wasn't thinking we were going to talk about that, but I like that idea.
Dude, detachment from perspective, I think it would be perspective, correct me if I'm wrong, is a superpower when it comes to being the parent of a toddler. And the reason I say that is like right now, Shay is 16 months old. So he's very much at the age where he's like, starting to push some boundaries, starting to like, he knows what he wants and he'll ask for it, and he'll get really upset if he doesn't get it. Throw things, whatever, like all the things that like are stereotypical of a toddler. And from a lot of the books that I've read, podcasts that I've listened to, and I feel like this is the right way to deal with it. Like the more calm, cool, and collected that you can stay, the better it is at dealing with that stuff, both short term and long term. Now, obviously, easier said than done, right? Like he drops his food on the ground for like the fifth time and keeps making a mess. Like you're going to get agitated. But I think that the thing that's been most powerful for me, and Ariel's really helped me with this because a lot of the kind of reading she's done and stuff is like really understanding that, man, like, it's a shame that like the terrible twos is like this thing that gets talked about and joked about because like, dude, when a toddler is like 1 to 2 years old, like they have no way of controlling their impulses. And they're literally just trying to figure out this fucking new world that they've never known. Like, I think that a lot of the narrative out there around like toddlers being manipulative and like, the terrible twos, like I personally don't like that stuff because I think that that plays into why parents, maybe specifically dads, can have issues with like, their temper or like getting upset about things you really shouldn't. Because if you can detach from the fact that like, dude, this little guy, he doesn't know better. Like he just doesn't. Like, he's just trying to figure it out. And I think that like that gives you a lot more patience. And at least for me, it's helped me, just deal with maybe some instances where it'd be easy to get like super caught up and frustrated, and just kind of continue doing what I believe we should be doing, which is like constantly letting him know that like, hey, this isn't something we do, but doing it in a way that's like very level-headed. And it goes back to the Savan podcast, like Savan was talking about these rules he has for his kids. And I'd be curious to ask him this, but he never said that he like screams. He doesn't yell at them. He doesn't chew them out when they do these things. Like he had a bunch of examples in the episode of like, he told them not to touch the case in the Starbucks. They did it. We left. We go. Like,
I know.
We're done. It's over.
That was a hard one. That's a hard one to stomach, right? Like imagine you're all fired up for a,
right.
whatever.
But the lesson there is like, dude, you screwed me, you screwed you. But like, I know, like, not I know, but I'm fairly certain that this is true. But I'm sure that whenever Savan upholds those rules, he's not doing it losing his temper and screaming at the kids. He's just saying, hey, there was a rule, it was broken, and now there's a consequence and we're going to do it. And I think that that's what I aspire to be able to do, but I can see why it's difficult because some of these things are very frustrating, right? But the thing that's helped me do that is just understanding their perspective, where they're coming from, just knowing that it's not their fault that they don't have these impulse controls. Obviously, there's a fucking toddler. And if anything, it's the responsibility of us as parents to teach them the correct way to deal with this through like constant reinforcement and having rules and having consequences, but not yelling at them, right?
No.
Not like blowing up or having like an absolute meltdown. And dude, I'm sure it'll happen. I'm not going to be perfect, but like at least I'm trying to be aware of that. And one thing that's helped me is just detaching from like what I think might be the reason that he's acting the way he's acting, instead of just like, dude, he doesn't know better. And it's my responsibility to teach him better.
Yeah, man. I think, like you said, I think detachment is like a superpower. My biggest takeaway when I went to the Echelon Front Leadership Summit was that. That was my biggest takeaway was that, is that before a situation, when it's getting hot, heated, just take a deep breath, say, hey, am I detaching from my ego, my emotion, my perspective? That's it. And I think if you could do that, I think it's super, super powerful.
Dude, Andy Stumpf, last example about this, but Andy Stumpf was on a podcast, I can't remember where, but he was talking about it from a leadership perspective and just how he's been in situations, dude, where like literally he was like, I'm going to die here. So for people that don't know, Andy Stumpf, former Navy SEAL, like, Special Forces badass. I know you've been on his podcast. And he was just explaining how in those situations where he had been abroad in crazy firefights, whatever, and he was like, literally like, this is it. Like, I'm not getting out of this situation. Hearing whatever the leader was at the time come in on the radio and give the orders as if he was on his back porch having a cup of tea was the most calming, like impact it had on the team. And it was the reason that it got them out of the situation that they were in. And it's the perfect example of everything we're talking about. Like, and again, easier said than done. Like the easy thing to do in that scenario is to get on the radio and start barking out the orders. Like it's life and death, right?
Yeah.
Like literally like go over there, like go.
Yeah, we got bullets flying over here. Like, yeah.
But instead being that leader that could be like, all right, I need this person here. I need this here. We need to do this and that. Like, I think that the importance of how these things are said, whether it's a leader or a parent or whatever, and it all comes back to just detaching from the emotions of the situation. And that's such a good example because it's literally life or death, right? Like literally.
Yeah,
like,
that's a heated example.
That's high stakes.
That's high stakes. At the FTX course I took, they throw like smoke bombs and they put on like alarms.
They're trying to get you into that. They're trying to get you into that situation as best they can. Yeah.
Yeah, they're trying to get you in the similar. I mean, it's never going to be that.
Sure, but it's as close as you can in like a controlled setting, right?
Yeah, they're trying to get you there so you could, under that stress, because that same stress that I felt when they were like throwing smoke grenades, playing Metallica, like talking all kinds of shit, whatever, like all that stuff that they're doing to you, that's a similar, like, I guess, stress or level when you start feeling like you're like, like when you're in a difficult situation and maybe you're having a difficult conversation with somebody and all of a sudden you could feel kind of like, for lack of a better term, you're not blood boiling. I don't know if that's the right term, but you're feeling like a little bit anxious, whatever.
For sure. Like heart rate goes up, respiration goes up. Like you're like, yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about.
They're trying to emulate that so that you could then say, okay, just take that deep breath, detach, then boom. So yeah, man, if Andy, I got to go listen to that one. I haven't seen him in a little bit. Last time him and I rolled jiu-jitsu, I gotta roll with him hopefully in the next couple of months. Cause I like what he's about for sure.
100%, man. I have to remember what podcast it was on. It was a little while back, but I remember hearing that. And then it reminded me when you were talking about it, because what a great example of the importance to come into a situation calm, cool, and collected when like, dude, the majority of the planet wouldn't be able to be calm, cool, and collected with bullets flying over them, right?
I'll leave you with a quick Andy Stump story. I think I've already told you this, but like talk about calm, cool, and collected. We are climbing the Navy SEAL. We're at the Navy SEAL O course in Coronado, the entire seminar staff for CrossFit, and we're climbing the cargo net. And, I felt like the cargo net was 100 feet high. I'm pretty sure it was 60, but it was high enough mentally and physically where I think what they were trying to accomplish is like, dude, if you fell off the top, like you're not going to be doing good. Like it was sand underneath, but like you're going to get really messed up if you fall off the top. And so we were able to do the O course with the exception they have this one thing called slide for life, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And we weren't allowed to do that one, but we were able to do the cargo net at the end. And Andy's stump is at the top of this cargo net, 60, 80, 100, 1,000 feet up, whatever it felt like for me. It was like a gazillion miles up with his foot wrapped around the cargo net and just sitting on the top for probably a solid like 30 minutes. And each person from CrossFit went up and over for the most part. And then all of a sudden, Dave Castro, I got called out. I didn't want to do it. So I go up there and I'm climbing this cargo net. I get to the top and he's giving me tons of shit. Like Andy's just like riffing me. I get right up to the top. I'm about to go over the top and I am just like terrified because I'm going up and over the cargo net. So I'm looking down, it's hella far down. And he changed his tone and he detached from like that previous Andy that was like all like, riffing to like this super calm, cool, collected Andy. He's like, hey man, I need you to do this. Sure enough, I got to see that side of him where like this, like in a heightened moment for me, he was able to just like calm me down and get me over the top of this cargo net. So shout out to Andy Stump if you're listening.
That's it, man. That's what like good leadership is all about. And like, being a dad is exactly that. So it makes sense that there are all these parallels, right?
Dude, hey, people from the top of that cargo net to set the course time would drop from the top and then re-grab onto the cargo net halfway down. So to set the course record, they would have to go over the top, let go, fly, grab to get to the bottom. Okay. Anyways. All right. Well, hey,
there's different levels of humans out there.
I guess so. And I'm not one of them. I'm not ready to go, squirrel fly down a cargo net, but, hey, look, we got great workouts coming up this week. We got great workouts we've had for a couple of weeks. It's been an awesome, intro to phase 2. If you are not on the Train Hard app. You got to go check it out. You know, and then also, if you've gotten value out of these guest episodes, if you get value from just us talking about things that are going on in our lives, you know, what really helps us out, we don't have any like sponsors or paid ads other than our own current business, which is Train Hard. But what does help the podcast out is leaving a rating and review. It takes you guys, you know, a couple of seconds, but it definitely helps us out. So if you're listening and you have not left us a rating and review wherever you listen to this podcast at, we would greatly appreciate it. Gabe, any kind of closing remarks here?
No, man, this was fun. You know, when we have these guest episodes, we have really good conversations during the episode, obviously. And then usually like me and you'll like talk a little bit about it before we record the intro. But I usually have so many thoughts go through my head and I think about like the different things the guest said. So it was really nice to kind of like recap a lot of these episodes. Not that we're recapping for someone that missed them in the past, but it was fun to talk about some of the key takeaways and what I've been doing since listening to these episodes. So I hope people enjoyed this. We'll do it again, and we have a whole bunch more awesome guests lined up. So yeah, check out the podcast. Please give us a rating or review, but that's it, man.
All right. Well, I hope everybody's family and you are doing well, and we'll see you again next week.